Alrighty, we're live. Hopefully y'all can hear me. Supposed to, I think the etiquette is that you give it a few minutes for people to jump on and join in. So, I guess that's what I'll do. There might be a whole whopping 2 people that show up, which is totally possible. Yeah, we'll just hang tight and see how many people show up. So, hey, Andrew. I'm fully anticipating to have all of like 2 people here. So, so you made the cut. Way to go. As long as you guys can hear me, that's, I guess, the important thing, right? So, anywho, I don't know how long I'm supposed to wait. I've never done really many live things, so this is all kind of new to me. So, yeah. Yeah, I probably did. Interesting. I probably did tick off a lot of people with that last episode, didn't I? Ironically, if that's the case, they're still welcome to be part of the conversation. I think if they were ticked off, they'd want to come here and give me a piece of my mind, but maybe they said their piece already in the comments. So, yeah, so we'll see. I did hear from a few people that they were going to be chiming in here at some point. I don't know how soon that'll be, but we'll see. So, can you hear me okay? I don't know if I'm getting picked up much on this. I haven't used this mic for a live broadcast, so I'm seeing hearts flying, so I'll take that as a really creepy way of saying yes, you can hear me, I would assume. All right, sounds good. Brenda, hi Brenda, thanks for joining. Lots of, okay, now you're getting a little nuts there, Andrew. Welcome, welcome, welcome. For those of you that are viewing, feel free to jump in on the chat as well if you have any questions. That's how we're going to be doing it. Eddie, good to see you. Thanks for checking in, man. Appreciate it. Yeah, wow, I'm like already double what I thought I was going to get for this chat, so I appreciate it very much. So, yeah, I guess I don't know if I should get started yet or wait a few more minutes. I guess we can wait a couple minutes here, but yeah, thank you guys all for checking in. I don't know how long this is going to last. I guess it kind of depends on how many questions you guys have, but and feedback that you guys are providing me on ideas for next season and all of that sort of stuff too. But I do not anticipate it going super long. I try to keep my episodes themselves less than an hour, and I don't anticipate this going anywhere near that long. But of course, as soon as I say that, that almost guarantees it'll go an hour, right? So maybe I'll keep hush hush on that. So I guess we could just jump right in. First of all, I want to say a big, I don't know if they're viewing or watching, but a big thank you to all of my guests from this past season. We started off with Joel, and then we had Jonathan and DJ and Joe and Scott. A big thank you to all of you guys for having the courage to come on and have these conversations. Hopefully the conversations weren't too repetitive. I know some of them kind of overlapped a little bit, but the whole purpose of this podcast, and I feel like I thought my trailer did a good job of indicating what the purpose of it was, but to spell it out super clear for you guys just moving forward, in case you were kind of wondering, this podcast isn't about like teaching. and even necessarily about preaching. This podcast is about raising questions that facilitate meaningful conversation amongst believers, and that's the real purpose behind it. So, so I know some of you have reached out to me directly on Messenger and in other areas and said, "Hey, like, you guys bring up scripture and you talk about it, but you're not like, this isn't like a sitting down lecture kind of a thing about this particular issue. This is more of a raising questions that maybe Christians aren't really spending enough time thinking about and considering about, and then going to scripture to search out those answers and what God would convict them of in their own personal walk." So that's really what this podcast is about. It's facilitating conversations. So sometimes episodes are going to be point counterpoint, like the God and Guns one with Joe. That was very much a point counterpoint. He was coming at it from a very different perspective than I was, and that was intentional. And then others are going to be more of a conversation about a particular issue that maybe the guest has some insight on, that raises important talking points and questions and areas that Christianity might be coming into conflict with culture that are worth us spending more time considering and praying about and thinking about. So, so I'm just rolling that out there right off. I do want to throw this up to you guys, open it up to you. If you guys have any questions at all, any of the episodes that you saw, what ones connected with you the most? Which episodes did you not like? Like, I'm totally open to feedback and criticism and questions. If you need clarification on anything, let me know what questions you guys might have. Which episodes did you listen to? Which ones did you enjoy the most? Which ones challenged you the most? Feel free to jump into the comment section and just type a question, and I'll try and do my best to answer it. So if you have any, feel free to just type away. Excuse me while I drink my coffee. Extremely late at night. I suppose I could maybe ask you guys some questions. And next season, I am planning on diving into a little bit deeper some of the issues that we touched on in the last episode about politics. We're going into an election year, and this is going to be pretty. I just noticed. I'm just scrolling down now. Brian, welcome. Christina, welcome. Thank you guys for jumping in. Todd, welcome. Eddie as well. Nathan, good to see you. Sorry, I'm like not realizing I have to scroll down here. Anyways, I am going to be having a guest on. He and I have actually talked. Some of you guys noticed the article that I posted, the 20 signs that you've made politics an idol. That particular article is written by a guy that I thought was really worth having a conversation with about that issue specifically. You know, those of you who listen to the politics one, you'll notice that the conversation is definitely more about idolatry and the struggle with making, in his position and his particular situation and mine, the Republican Party being an idol. That was what that conversation is really more about. So the title was maybe a little intentionally controversial, and that was on purpose. As I said, it was intentional. But diving more deeply, specifically into how politics itself can really be an idol for believers going into an election year, I think that's going to be a really important conversation that hopefully people will benefit from thinking about and praying about and reflecting on themselves. So, Brian, what in the world is that question? Didn't realize you owned a yellow submarine. Probably the aesthetics. Yeah, it's my studio. Not exactly the prettiest place to do a live stream from, I will give you that. But it's the in the house. So anyways, so yeah, we're going to be doing conversations about that. We also have some guests that are going to be coming on talking about mental health, dealing and struggling with depression within the church. When I took a poll a while back earlier this year, that was one of the main issues that you guys brought up as being something that you would like to hear us explore and talk about, maybe take a more critical eye to. So we are going to be talking about that, as well as other aspects of mental health that kind of branch off from that. And I might have other guests that come on to talk more specifically about things like substance abuse and drug addiction, and supporting those who have drug addictions, and how much of an issue is things like marijuana, for example. We have marijuana is becoming legal all across the country, state by state, it seems like, and I'm sure it'll get there at some point in nearly every state in the country. So how does the church respond to that sort of stuff? And those who deal with drug addictions, and those who deal with mental health issues, and mental illnesses, and all of that sort of stuff. So all of that is going to be a really good conversation that I hope you guys stay tuned for. I'm really looking forward to those conversations. And then, yeah, like I said, the conversation about politics being an idol going into an election year, man, that is huge. If you look at the comment section on the last post that I put on this page, promoting the most recent episode that came out, man, is politics an idol in people's lives. And I say that in a very self-deprecating sort of way, because it is a huge struggle for me too, if I'm being perfectly honest. And I thought I pointed that out and made that pretty clear. Welcome, Rod. Good to see you, man. Thanks for joining in the conversation. It's a huge idol for a lot of believers. And so I think taking a more critical look specifically at almost like red flags that we can break down of what that means for us personally would be a really good discussion. In addition to that, we are also going to be having some conversations, hopefully, about youth, millennials, student culture, possibly just the what seems to be a culturally growing divide between the boomers and millennials, and how that might be impacting the church as well. Because that seems to be a really odd and divisive kind of thing that's creeping up in our culture. Like, you have the whole "okay boomer" phrase that just becomes an awful insult that is done extremely sarcastically and very dismissive of people who are baby boomers. And then, of course, baby boomers, on the other hand, are also saying things in our culture that are very demeaning and critical of millennials, and everybody else is watching that, and that church is kind of stuck in the middle of that. So so that's going to be another topic that we'll probably tackle. But really looking forward to this next season. I really am. I don't know how many episodes specifically we're going to do. I honestly didn't know how many I was going to do in this one. I figured I'd probably end at 6, but turns out the last one kind of needed its own 2-parter in order to keep the conversation going. So yeah, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed it and had an opportunity to listen. I really appreciate all the support that you guys have been giving, especially after the release of this last episode that just seemed to churn up some really ugly stuff for a lot of people. So so thank you for all the support and for sticking with me, and sticking with the podcast and seeing the bigger vision behind this thing of being willing to raise questions to the church and encourage them to think critically and have important conversations. So are there any specific questions that you guys have about specific episodes? 40 episodes seasons from here on out. No, that's not going to happen. I don't know that I have the margin for that, Andrew. Sorry. I would probably kill myself doing that if I were to do that. What episodes were the most striking to you guys, though? Were there any conversations that you had that you felt like, wow, I would really like to ask a follow-up question on this or that or whatever? So If you missed one, that's a great question, Brenda. If you missed one, you can go back and listen. That's how podcasts work. I don't know how you're listening, but the podcast itself is on in Google and all of these different places, Spotify. And you can go back and find each individual episode and listen to them as many times as you want. And I would encourage you to do that. One of the reasons why I put this whole thing together was so that people, when they listen to it, could share it with people in their life, that they could kind of use it as a conversation starter with people in their life, that they think it might be beneficial to have a meaningful conversation about whatever the issue is that that particular episode is about. So most episodes are kind of self-contained, and I did that on purpose too, so that it wasn't like if you missed one, then you're not up to date and you're going to miss something from the last episode that carries over. Most of them aren't like that. The last one, Leaving the GOP for Jesus, that particular one was a two-parter. So if you missed the first part of that, I would encourage you to go back and check that out, because it definitely sets up and frames some of the conversation in part two, which is helpful. But yeah, most of it you can go back and listen to as many times as you want. So what was my favorite episode or interview? That's a great question. Am I taking a cop-out answer by saying all of them? I think I am. It's a total cop-out. I understand. But if I'm being totally transparent, I kind of like rocking the boat, and so a little bit, and challenging people. So my two episodes that probably rocked the boat the most were the conversations around guns, and then the conversation around leaving the GOP. And that was I kind of touched on this earlier, like just a couple minutes ago, but for those of you that missed it, that particular episode about leaving the GOP, I was really intentional about picking that specific name and title for that conversation. And I talked with Bill about it because I knew it was going to be a controversial title. And knowing the conversation going into editing and all of that we had, I knew there really wouldn't be a whole lot in the conversation itself that would be super controversial to those who would listen to it, who are believers. At least that was my take from it, and Bill as well. Both of us, after listening to the whole conversation multiple times through, we're like, yeah, there's not really a whole lot here that's super controversial, but maybe insightful and stuff that makes people think a little bit. But the title itself, definitely an attention-grabbing, controversial kind of title. And the reason why I went with that, because I'd actually thought about maybe going with just leaving politics for Jesus instead of the GOP. And I was very purposeful in going with the GOP, leaving the GOP, because I felt like being that specific in the title was important. It was accurate, 100% accurate, both for Bill as well as myself. And I felt like, since I knew most of the conversation that he and I had was about the idolatry of the Republican Party, that meant the reason why that conversation would be so, or that title would be so inflammatory, I guess is the best way to put it, or would be so controversial, was mainly for those who would read it and think all kinds of stuff that really wasn't in the conversation. That they would read it and just have a knee-jerk reaction, assuming stuff, and ultimately probably would be a red flag, hopefully for them, that it might be an idol for them as well. And then I released the episode, and you can just look through the comments and see that's exactly what happened. There's a lot of people who chimed in on that didn't even bother listening to the conversation. They just read the title and ran an assumption. And that was it. So So it was kind of, I mean, maybe it was a little unfair. Maybe it was. Maybe I kind of set some people up a little bit with that title, I will admit. But I did that on purpose. And really, if I'm being really honest, the main reason why I did that on purpose was because I felt, again, going back to the vision of this entire show, being about facilitating challenging conversations with people. I felt like anybody who would read the title, Leaving the GOP for Jesus, if they had the courage to get past that title and actually listen to the conversation, then that meant they were probably at a point in their life where they were willing to at least reflect on their own life and maybe have a conversation with people in their life about whether or not politics is an idol for them. If they can't get past the title to even listen to the person that's in the conversation, and they just get angry because of the 5 words that they just read and that is it, and then they just start jumping online and like throwing out all kinds of well, you can probably go back and read it if you want. Then they're probably not ready to have that conversation, obviously. So that's going to happen. And then there's also the occasional comment of random atheist dude who shows up with some, like, I don't know what you want to call it, like a drive-by angry rant about how God is awful and there is no God and y'all are crazy, and they aren't contributing to the conversation either. So you'll get those. But for those who were able to get past the title, hopefully you found the conversation at the very least insightful and giving you some things to think about going into this election year. So yeah. Is the guest from the GOP episode willing to do a follow-up episode like a Q&A? That's a great question, Brian. I would assume he probably is. Although, full transparency, hey Dale, good to see you. Welcome. Full transparency, if you guys can be praying for that scenario, there are some people who actually started reaching out to him directly and trying to track down his family and his father and sending all kinds of, let's just say, less than wholesome and somewhat disturbing conversations things that they were saying, and like, so he may or may not want to. I would assume he'd probably be okay because at this point now his name is already out there. Yeah, he probably would be willing to do a Q&A. The real question is how transparent would he be able to be for a Q&A, and I would leave that totally up to him and let him speak on that for himself. So, but that's a good question. Very good question, Brian. And I'm totally willing to do that too. I already talked with Joe, who did the guns episode, and he said he'd be willing to do a follow-up conversation, do a part 2 or a Q&A about that conversation specifically too, because that was a conversation that I think even a lot of my own friends and family were probably surprised to hear me take the position that I have on the issue of guns, from like the theological position on it that I have. I think that probably surprised a lot of people, especially since I'm generally more of a, I guess you could say, conservative person in the circles that I'm in. Those of you who are really conservative and listening and thinking I'm an extremely liberal person, that might give you a little insight into the circles that I'm in. Yeah, I'd love to do a follow-up Q&A. He probably would, and I will definitely ask him for sure, Brian. So any other questions about any of the episodes or my positions or things that I put forth that you guys just wanted clarification on, maybe, or an episode that maybe challenged you a little bit that you appreciated, episodes that you think would be good ideas to do next in the next season? This thing kind of grows and evolves with you guys doing this with me. So any ideas or support or feedback or questions that you have, just let me know, and I will do my best to answer it. So, excuse me, I'm going to drink some water. I don't know how people can talk for a living. That is crazy. Yeah. So, my my favorite episode, though, I would probably have to say the guns one. If I have to pick one, would probably be the guns one. And I think the reason why that is because I feel like it's a great example of what I hope people can see as possible and are inspired to do through witnessing this discussion, is that you can sit down and have a conversation with someone that you disagree with, that you also love, and do it respectfully in a way that honors the Lord. Yeah, I mean, Joe's absolutely one of my best friends, still is, love him to pieces. His family has been through so much, and I very much understand why he has the position that he does on guns. I don't agree with his position, but I understand it. And I think he understands mine. We're working on it together. We keep having conversations about it. And I love that episode because I feel like that's the embodiment really of what I hope God is able to demonstrate in this podcast and do in other people's lives, is have conversations that push people a little bit to dive back into the Word and find out what Scripture has to say about something. So, did I see what I did hear about that, Brenda? There was a shooting in the Texas church today. I did hear about that. Yeah. And that's tragic. And there were people there that were armed, and they were able to put a stop to it before other people lost their lives. And I don't have any problem with that. So, if that's what people feel called to do, okay. So, again, it goes back to, I think for me, the idolatry component to it. And I think this last season, that word's been coming up a lot, idolatry. I feel like the gun culture itself is really what the biggest issue is that I have. And when I see Christians really wrap their theology into their gun culture, that's when I start to kind of have a problem. If people want to have guns, they want to own guns, use it for self-defense, use it for sport. I am by no means telling anybody that they shouldn't or can't or don't have a right to do that. But I do start to have a problem with it when people start trying to manipulate Scripture into justifying their position, especially when it's Scripture that was never intended to be taken that way. So, and I think there are some things in politics and in society that you can take a position on and make a very strong argument for it without having to drag God into the conversation and say, hey, here, God agrees with me about this. Because sometimes you're making it a stretch, too much of a stretch. And if there's too much of a stretch, then you're risking making an idol and bringing God down to our level, instead of us going to Scripture and using that to align the way that we're living our life. So that's what I meant. Like when the whole, in that particular episode, there was and it comes up a lot with Luke 22, when he says, sell your cloak, buy a sword, and all of that. There's disagreements about what that verse means. I very, very, very firmly believe that he is not talking about actually selling your cloak and buying a literal sword. That's my position on it. People can disagree with that if they want, and they do. But that's my understanding of it after looking over a lot of theologians and a lot of people throughout the history of the church who've written various exhaustive commentaries on Scripture. The majority of them seem pretty adamant that it's a metaphor and it's a part of prophecy, and the disciples didn't get it. which is why you don't see any examples moving forward in the New Testament of any of the disciples using their sword to defend themselves. And that's, I think, pretty compelling. You look at a great example, the Apostle Paul, when you look at his story of literally being stoned to death, seemingly to death, and then dragged outside the city, left for dead. There's no indication anywhere that he was armed to defend himself or that he used any weapon to try and defend himself. And the disciples, other believers, were right there witnessing the entire thing. They never rushed to his defense. They never rushed in to try and overtake his attackers. He stood up for the truth, stood up for the gospel, took it, dragged out to the edge of the city, left for dead, and then he gets up. He's not dead. And then he goes back into the city and continues on his mission. Like, that was his response, you know. I never used to hold that position. I'm going to be perfectly transparent. I never used to hold this kind of a position on guns and on self-defense. This is a very radically different position that I hold today than I did, I mean, even 10 years ago. Very different. And the reason why I've come to this very radically different position today is for that very reason, that I looked at scripture and I just I couldn't justify it to myself anymore. If others out there obviously disagree with me, and that's okay. That's okay. In no way am I trying to say, hey, you have to have my position on this. And that's maybe something that I should make a little bit more clear in my other episodes moving forward. I try to make that clear. But I'm not one to say you have to take my position on this. Again, that's not what this podcast is about. The purpose of this podcast is to just listen to people's perspectives, listen to what they have to say, think about it reflectively, and then go to scripture. So, yeah. So anyways, yeah, I hope that maybe answers your question, Brenda, if you're still there. I don't know if you are. You may not have liked my answer and left. I'm okay with that. But I hope you're sticking around. I love that you're here. So, yeah, like these kind of conversations, be willing to have them. Be willing to have them with people in your life, and be willing to do it respectfully. That's the thing I think that probably was the most disappointing about the release of the last episode. And I'm not just talking about online. I'm also talking about personally in my own life. I had people who definitely didn't listen to the conversation that we had and just read the title and kind of started associating me and my assumed politics with other conversations that they'd had, whether it was with me or other people who are in a completely different political position than I am even. But having the courage to really have those conversations with people and do it respectfully, which requires listening. Like there's a reason why in my trailer, I put it out very clear. Like, this is about having the courage to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Like, the church is not doing that enough today. We're really not. And going into an extremely polarizing political year, that is going to become all the more vitally important for the church, which is part of the reason why I really want to keep doing this podcast. I know it's going to be challenging. I know there's going to be people who are going to see a title and just start flinging out all kinds of, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? So, but hopefully it's the kind of thing that will draw out some of these, idols or addictions or challenges that people have in some of these areas, And if for nothing else, if they don't see it, other people's will look on that and recognize it for what it is, and maybe take a reflective look at whether or not they respond in the same way at times. So, yeah. So, yeah. So hopefully that answers some of your guys' questions. I really do appreciate all of you guys listening. This has been a crazy, wild ride. I really seriously do not, it blows my mind the kinds of responses that I've been getting from people. I've got like every state in the country is listening to this thing. Somebody's listening in every state. And then I've got literally like 8 or 9 different countries now. Like we have India and Japan, and like I'm like I don't even know how that happens. I think Kenya maybe is even one of them. It's kind of crazy. So I don't know what fruit or benefit the conversations are giving for those of you that are in those areas, but thank you for listening. I hope it's beneficial and helpful. Let me know what other conversations you guys would like to hear us have, though. Like I said, mental health is a big one that we're going to be talking about. I also think, okay, and so here's another thing off of the branch of mental health, and in that kind of in that world, there's another, I don't know yet who exactly it is that I would talk to about it. I'm still looking for the right guest, but I do want to have a conversation about the church not being prepared to support families with special needs. As someone who's worked in junior high for a lot of years and spent a lot of time working directly one-on-one with students who have different special needs and different just different mental disorders, psychological disorders, or I mean, whatever you want to call it. There's all this. It's a very broad conversation. But I know there are families out there that have had a really, really damaging experience with the church. And the church, I say, like Christianity in general in the United States, because people who were on staff at their churches that they were attending just did not know how to support them in the area of special needs, did not know how to care for their kids or support them as parents, and make margin and make room for these families that have children with special needs in their congregation. And we absolutely need to be doing that. We need to do better at that. So so that's another conversation that I want to have, and I'm praying I can find the right guest for that. If you guys have any suggestions or know of somebody who'd be willing to have that conversation, please send them my way. I would love to do that. But that's another conversation that I want to have, and I don't know if I'll be able to get to it this next season or not, but I hope to. I hope to, because that's something the church needs to get better at. It really is. In addition to all the other mental health stuff, like dealing with depression, and I mean, you could talk about the suicide rates within, pastors that just seems to be getting bigger and bigger. I would argue it's just becoming more and more brought to our attention. I think it's been there for a while, but yeah. So thank you, Andrew. I appreciate that. I'm working hard at this. This has not been an easy season for me. 2019, I'm going to be grateful that 2019 is over. It has been a very, very difficult year for me. This podcast has been very, very much a labor of love, and it has cost me quite a bit personally. I'm not just talking about like financially or money or anything like that. Although it's cost that too. I'm definitely not making any money off of this, and that's on purpose. I'm not doing this to make any money. I don't take sponsorships or anything like that. I think Anchor, which is the main place I'm hosting it, might have like a donations thing or something, but nothing's ever come in from that, and I'm totally okay with that. That's not, I don't even know if I have an option of taking that off or not, but that's not the thing that I'm doing this for. This is a total labor of love. And it's a labor of love that came out of having enough conversations like this with people in my life that I love, that were fruitful. And those people told me, hey, this was a really good conversation. I really appreciated it. And enough of those people saying, hey, you should do this more often. And then my sister-in-law, Laurel, I don't know if you're listening or not, but she actually just flat out said, you need to just do this as a podcast. And I was like, yeah, I probably could do that. I mean, my undergrad's in broadcasting, so I probably wouldn't be too hard to put it together. And she actually was super duper 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 helpful in laying the foundation of getting this thing off the ground. So so thank you if you're listening, or I appreciate it. Yeah, but this has been a total labor of love. Not for 1 minute have I regretted any of it at all. The conversations that we've had, the episodes that we've put out, I stand behind every one of them. I'm very proud of them. And I say that having known that it cost me quite a bit. There are some people in my life, some friends that I had that definitely did not appreciate what I had to say, or how I said it, or what I was trying to do through some of these conversations. But this is definitely a ministry for me. Like, this is something that it's an outlet for me in a lot of ways. And I put a lot of time and a lot of prayer and a lot of thought into every episode and every conversation and every question that I ask. And I don't have any regrets about it. I really don't. I mean, the conversations that I have had with many of you that have been very uplifting have only pointed to the fact that these kinds of conversations, these types of outlets, there needs to be more of them. So that's why I'm doing it. So any other questions, or any I don't know, anything? Or we're coming on 45 minutes here of me chatting, which has been amazing. Hi, Jackie. Hi. Thanks for checking in. That's great to see you. I'm really, really blown away at how many different people are checking in here. So, yeah, Corey, I don't know if you're still listening, but thank you. I'm just now seeing your name. Thank you. I'm like, wow, okay. Yeah, thank you guys for listening, and for checking it out, and for sharing it with people in your life that you think would be benefiting from hearing these conversations. So more news on next season. I've got 3 interviews already essentially lined up. Dates aren't firmly set yet, but 3 for sure that are coming up, and more, actually 4, and more that are in the works. So yeah, this Q&A has had a whole lot more A than it did Q, but that's okay. That's okay. So I can't thank you guys enough. I really can't. I'm probably gonna end with that, unless you guys have any burning questions. Feel free to throw it out there now. But I really can't thank you guys enough for supporting what we're doing with this podcast. And I say we because it isn't it really isn't just me. I don't want it to be just me. I get feedback from you guys. And really, this is meant to just be a tool and a resource to empower you guys to build the kingdom and let the church grow from these conversations. So, yeah. Have I thought about incorporating video into your conversations? I have. It would probably be in the vein of something like this. That would be more of a Q&A type thing. The main reason for that, that's a good question, Brian. The main reason for that is because each episode actually has a lot more editing in it than most people probably realize. Not editing out a whole lot of like substantial content in the conversation, but from someone who has a background in broadcasting and someone who has a background in audio production, most conversations that you listen to have a lot of dead air space between people talking, because a lot of the time people will spend time thinking about what they want to say and then say it. Or they'll fill that dead air with ums and ahs and all that sort of stuff. And then the other side of it too is a conversation can often become very circular, and you can end up rehashing a similar issue multiple times in the same time frame of discussion if you don't have it. If you don't have the conversation taking place with people who are aware of that sort of a thing and are good at guiding themselves and the conversation. So that's the big reason why I don't do videos, because it would require all that much more editing, and chopping up video is a lot. Let's just say it's a little messier in some cases for editing. So it wouldn't come across quite as well. So when I sit down and I edit the conversations, usually each episode that I have, take that time that the actual episode ran and double it. That's probably the length of the actual conversation editing, like the actual audio. Double it or almost double it. That's usually how that ends up going. And then after I cut out dead air and I cut out any repetitive or circular parts of the conversation, usually it dwindles it down to about 2/3 to half of what the conversation itself was. So I try and keep it brief and concise and something that makes it a little bit smoother and easier for people to listen to through the whole thing. By no means am I perfect at it, but yeah, that's a big reason why video isn't a big part of it. So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Brian. So scroll down. I wish I didn't have to keep scrolling down. So yes, Brenda, that is exactly right. You asked me a question and then I could just answer. I love that too. I do. I love that. It's a big reason why I'm doing this. I love it. So do you have any other questions that you want to ask? I'd love to answer them for you if you have any. Sorry, I'm scrolling through some of these other comments and questions here. I'm interested in your guys' thoughts on doing the doing an episode about like supporting people with special needs. Is that something that, as you guys are in church, like, is that something that you think would resonate with very many people? I know it's something that I'm passionate about, but I also might be a little biased in that regard. But do you think that that's something that would be worth exploring in a conversation, and then putting that conversation out there? So let me know. Let me know if you think it would be worth doing. So yeah, so we're coming up on almost an hour here, and I don't want to go too much longer. I'd be happy to go to an hour if you guys are up for it. But yeah, if you have any questions, just let me know. Curious what you guys' thoughts are on the music one. That's one that I feel like that one was the more hit or miss. Like some people love that episode and it's their absolute favorite, and then others, not a big deal. To be perfectly honest, the politics one is actually the same way with some people. My wife loved her to pieces. Politics isn't a huge thing for her, so she was like, it was okay. I love the conversation, so but yeah, so good questions though so far, you guys. And I don't know if there's any additional questions. I'll if you have questions, feel free to throw them out into the discussion in the comment section. I'll maybe kind of wrap up with this though, as just some prayer requests. Trying to think of the best way to put this. Pray for, I guess, my mental health is the best way to put it. Without getting into a whole lot of detail, the last 2 years, really, been really rough for me. And I'm trying to be as diligent as I can to use the gifts that God's given me to do what I feel He's leading me to do, to challenge in areas that I feel need to be challenged, which is something that's very, I'm going to be perfectly honest, it's not something that I'm comfortable with doing in a more open setting like this, like a podcast, to put myself out there like that. It's been very risky for me. And like I said, it's come at a bit of a cost too. There's some friendships that have definitely been ruined, sadly, because of stuff surrounding much of what I end up addressing in the podcast. And it's not just because of the podcast, like there's deeper stuff than that, but I'm staying, I still have a very, very, very deep conviction about what I'm doing with this thing, about having the courage to call out idols when you see them. That's going to make people mad. I know it is. To raise questions that are almost like, it's almost like you're slaughtering a sacred cow for some Christians when you start raising certain questions. And it's not out of any sense of, and if you know me well enough, hopefully you know this, that it's not out of a sense of pride or self-righteousness at all, but only out of a sense of trying to challenge people to make sure that Jesus is really, truly first in every area of their life. And that is it. And that's really it, you know. There's idols everywhere we look, you know. Our entire culture is trying to shove stuff in our face and get deep down into the roots of our heart, to take up residence in a place that belongs only for Jesus. And that keeps the church distracted. It keeps the church from staying focused on its mission and living it out the way that Jesus demonstrated and the way that He called us to. So that's why when I start raising questions about things that are maybe more American than they are Christian, or about politics and like all of that stuff. I mean, that it gets so complicated for a lot of people, and it gets so messy, and people get so upset, and it just breaks my heart. Um, it really does. But that just fuels me all that much more to realize that there's some serious stuff out there that the church needs to be called out on. And we need to be willing to have honest conversations about them. And some people aren't ready to have those conversations. And that's the other thing that I think I'm learning through this past season, is that some people just are not ready for those conversations. And that's okay. It has to be okay. I can't be offended by that. And I would hope that you please don't be offended by people who, if they chime in on the comment section and they're maybe getting a little too snarky or they're getting a little too sarcastic, believe me, it's tempting. I'm guilty of it myself. But you got to have patience with people, you know. You got to have patience with people, especially other believers. You know, they know we're Christians by our love one to another, right? And if there's another believer that's struggling with demonstrating love, that just makes it all the more important for you to be stepping up and demonstrating it. So, yeah. So please pray for that, for me, for that mental health side of it, because sometimes I feel like it can really get wearing on you, especially when you read things by people like some people were questioning whether or not I even was a Christian because I'm not supporting the Republican Party or whatever. I think they're assuming that that means I'm a Democrat. That doesn't make me a Democrat either. They're missing the big point of that whole episode, which was I'm not picking any party. I'm not. I'm just trying to focus on loving God and loving the people around me, and majoring on the majors and minoring on the minors, I guess. So pray for that, and then also pray for the right guests for the conversations that we're going to have. Zach, thanks for joining in, for chiming in here, dude. We're about to wrap up, but I'm glad you made it anyway, dude. Yeah, pray for the right guests to come on and have these conversations, and for the right episodes to be produced and put out there at the right time. I'll be honest with you, until I had a conversation with actually with a coworker of mine about the timing of my last episode about leaving the GOP for Jesus. I already picked a really inflammatory title, right? Very trolly kind of title. We talked about that already. And then literally days later, like a day or two later, the Christianity Today article comes out. Like, good Lord. Excuse me. Like, could that timing have been any worse? In my mind, I'm thinking, this is ridiculous. But then my coworker was like, no, that episode came out exactly when God wanted it to. And it came out exactly at the right time for some people to see the repetitive aspect of this issue coming up about idolatry and the church and the Republican Party, and making them actually reflect and think about that, honestly. So for somebody, it was the right time, and so don't beat yourself up over it. I'm like, okay, I guess it is in God's hands. So yeah. Anyways, so but praying for the right guests and the right timing for a lot of these conversations. Yeah, and the courage to have the right conversations with the right people. Sometimes the discussions are going to be point and counterpoint, and that means I need to be able to have a guest that hopefully is able to have the conversation respectfully and in a way that demonstrates the love of the Lord, even amongst disagreement. To be tolerant. That's a really interesting issue to throw around within the church. I think the word tolerant often gets confused with the word accepting. That seems to be what most people mean when they say that in our culture now. But it's not the same thing. tolerant means that there's some sort of a disagreement. You know, if there's an acceptance, then there's no need for tolerance because there's nothing to tolerate, you know. But you are going to face people and situations, even within the church, that require tolerance. And so hopefully the episodes that are coming up are going to be demonstrations of that and an opportunity to challenge everybody else to embrace that as well. So, and ultimately go to the Word of God and seek Him on exactly what it means for living it out in your own life. So, yeah. Anyways, it's been an hour, and it's been an hour. Are there any final burning questions that you guys have? If not, then I will probably call it a night. But I'll give you a second here to type in some questions if you do have any. I'm totally okay answering any questions. I really do want to answer ones that you have. If there are any questions that you might have, but you're like, I don't know that I want to throw it out into this whole chat, go ahead and shoot me a private message, or you can shoot me a message. Like the podcast itself, the Facebook group and the Facebook page have their own like message. You can send a message there, or you can send me a message directly if you're Facebook friends with me. Or one thing that I wanted to bring to your guys' attention, there is actually an option on Anchor on the link for the podcast that allows you to leave a message, like leave feedback. So if you have a burning question after you listen to an episode and you're like, I can't believe he said that, or, you know, I think it would have been better if, or, you know, I totally agreed with that, or, you know, I'd never thought of it this way. Thank you so much. Like any kind of feedback, go to the anchor.fm link, and there's a place there for you to leave a message. And there's also a specific phone number that is specific for the podcast that is in the about information on the Facebook page. And you can leave a message there too if you want. You can text that, or you can call and leave a message. But please let me know what God's doing through this podcast, if anything, in your life, or anyone that you're talking to. Yeah, I would really appreciate feedback from you guys, and feel free to shoot me a specific message. Yeah, I'd appreciate it. So anyway, sorry to cut you guys off. I do have to get to work in the morning, so I'm gonna probably call it a night here. But Brenda, I totally agree with you. You're absolutely right. Christians have to stand for what is right when the world is saying that we're wrong. Yeah, I totally agree. So all the more important why iron sharpens iron, right? And Christians need to continue to be having iron sharpening iron kind of conversations about what the word says, right? And how it applies to our life. So yeah, thanks for listening. Thank you all for participating in this conversation. And continue to pray for the podcast and all the conversations that we're having. I'm really looking forward to what comes in season 2. So God bless you all. Love you all. And hope you have a good night.